Welcome in. It's another edition of Soccer Files here on the SDH Network. My name is Jason Longshore, and today, March 30th, is a day that actually has some important meaning in Atlanta soccer history. It was in 1968 that the Atlanta Chiefs started their first ever season in the North American Soccer League. We'll get to that in a second. And went on to win their first and only North American Soccer League championship. It was the first major professional sports title for the city of Atlanta, and it was quite a road to get there. We'll talk about that on Soccer Files as we go, but what I wanted to zero in on was how the Atlanta Chiefs got to opening day in the first place. And it's a little complicated, and it's something that honestly I'm still digging into and learning about through some research that I'm doing right now. When professional soccer started in the United States on a nationwide basis in 1967, you had two different leagues. You'd originally had three leagues that were coming together trying to get the official sanctioning. One got it, the other two merged, and the NPSL, the National Professional Soccer League, was where the Atlanta Chiefs landed. In that first season in 1967, the Chiefs on the field were so-so. Off the field, they did pretty well. They were number 2 in the NPSL in attendance, and the front office for the Atlanta Chiefs was very heavily involved in all of the planning. Phil Woosnam was a player manager who earned a ton of respect, not just in the soccer world, but in the Atlanta sports world, for his efforts to teach the game, to grow the game. It was a very important part of Atlanta's long-term strategic plan was to have Phil Woosnam be part of it. When it was announced that Phil Woosnam would be back, the Vice President of the Atlanta Chiefs, Dick Cecil, at the time said, "Woosnam is staying with us, and we plan to continue our long-range program to build soccer on the professional, amateur, and schoolboy level in Atlanta and the Southeast. Other NPSL teams are doing the same in their sections. We have made unbelievable strides considering that some of these people didn't know what a soccer ball looked like 12 months ago." Not exaggerating at the end of that. You had, I think, 6 high schools that had soccer teams in 1967, and by 1968, you had 42. It's a huge jump. You saw the Atlanta Chiefs do hundreds of clinics throughout 1967. Tens of thousands of kids had the opportunity to play soccer because of the Chiefs. Organized youth soccer started, a state association got underway, an adult amateur league got underway. All of that stuff was a big part of the Atlanta Chiefs run, and that continued from when their season ended in 1967 to when they started in 1968. One of the other things that was going on in the background was the merger to bring the two leagues together, the United Soccer Association and the National Professional Soccer League. Eventually, they did merge. It was not easy to get there. There were meetings held throughout 1967 to try to get on the same page. There were meetings between the two leagues on their own. There were meetings involving the United States Soccer Football Association. FIFA was involved. Ultimately, as the merger got very, very close but was still not done yet, everybody was called to Switzerland to meet with Sir Stanley Rouse and the heads of FIFA. And it was pretty close to everybody basically being kicked out. I mean, it was a mess. And finally, everybody got on the same page. Finally. And you had the North American Soccer League announced for 1968. Now, that took that part of it off to the side. Some cities had complications with each league having a team in that city. Some merged, some moved, some went away. It was all kinds of complicated. But in Atlanta, it was all about preparing for the 1968 season and what was to come. So in January 18th, in the Atlanta Constitution, Wayne Minshew wrote that the Atlanta Chiefs, the soccer part of the Atlanta Braves organization, lost $300,000 in their first year. that was pretty good compared to what some other teams in both leagues lost in that first year. There were some who lost millions of dollars. Chiefs lost $300,000. At that time, that was okay for the Atlanta Braves because they did pretty well, and the overall organization ended up making money in 1967. So you're coming into 1968, and the team had high hopes. Phil Woosnam told Jesse Outler on January 24th that he believed that you would see 20,000 fans at some matches in the 1968 season. You did. Well, not in league matches, but in 3 friendlies, 2 with Manchester City and 1 with Santos. Atlanta saw over 20,000 at Atlanta Stadium. And those were the largest crowds involving an Atlanta professional club team until Atlanta United launched in 2017. That first game that Atlanta United played against the New York Red Bulls at Bobby Dodd Stadium, that broke records that had been set by the Chiefs in terms of an Atlanta club team playing. You had the local YMCA really start to get involved, and what started with a City of Atlanta program started to grow. DeKalb County became a hotbed of soccer in the metro area to the point that there were more high school boys playing soccer than American football. And that was a huge accomplishment in an area that had no soccer history. Georgia State, at the time Georgia State College, now Georgia State University, formed a club team in 1967, and they started the pathway to forming a varsity team in 1968. They played in the Atlanta District Amateur Soccer League, played local clubs, and turned into a club team, turned into a varsity team eventually, and that was another big process that the Chiefs helped out with. They donated equipment, they helped out with coaching, they helped out with support. Georgia State played games at Atlanta Stadium before the Chiefs played. Club teams from Georgia Tech and the University of Georgia also played at Atlanta Stadium before Atlanta Chiefs games. So training camp started for the Chiefs on January 30th, and they trained at Emory University. That was the HQ for the Atlanta Chiefs 1.0 throughout their entire run from 1967 until the end of the 1972 season. Phil Woosnam talked about wanting to have a large training camp in terms of players. He said, I'm also making sure we'll have 24 or 25 players at all times during training. This will enable us to play regular scrimmages, not only during training at Emory, but also on an exhibition basis throughout Georgia. At this moment, we are drawing up a schedule involving such cities as Columbus, Macon, LaGrange, Rome, and Athens. That's critical because when the Chiefs went and played an intra-squad scrimmage in these locations, was likely the first soccer game that had ever been played in these locations, definitely the first involving any professional players, and it planted those seeds. It was a really, really important element of it. Mentioned the growth on the high school side. This was the 3rd state championship in 1968, and it was won on February 17th by Briarcliff High School. They went on to win 3 of the next 5 state championships. They finished undefeated in their 1968 season, and they were one of the early powerhouses in high school soccer. DeKalb County became really the hub of soccer on the youth side all the way through high school in the metro Atlanta area. On February 23rd, the Chiefs played one of those intra-squad scrimmages in Macon at Luther Williams Field, minor league baseball stadium, famous venue. The Chiefs played a match there. It was maybe one of the first soccer matches ever played on an organized basis in Macon, Georgia. They played also in Rome, and they helped start a YMCA program in Rome, Georgia. Very cool to see that get started. Dave Haas was the Chiefs' director of soccer development. It was announced in late February that Dave would be available to instruct any group in the fundamentals of the game by request. If you wanted to have a soccer clinic, you would call the Chiefs up, and they would book a time for Dave Haas or another coach or a player to come out and conduct a clinic. It was that open door policy that was big. And Phil Woosnam said, the progress in this city is phenomenal. You will notice that most of the response is from the efforts of people in education and in the YMCA organization. I feel sure that the example set here in Atlanta will stimulate enthusiasm in other cities in the United States. I'd like to think that we will continue to set the pace in establishing soccer as a major sport throughout the United States. And he did, and that was in February 23rd. He did an interview with the Rome News Tribune and talked about those efforts and how important it was. So getting into March 1st, the Chiefs went to Rome, played a intra-squad scrimmage. It was sponsored by the Rome JCs, and it was for the benefit of the Rome Cerebral Palsy School. They went up to Knoxville to play an intra-squad scrimmage the next day and continued these with a match in Columbus, with a match in LaGrange, with a match in Jonesboro. They spread the word about the team. They got these intra-squad games in, but they also went out and helped build a fan base outside of the metro area. They launched something called the Goal Getters Club. It was a group for kids to earn points and earn gear, but feel like they were part of the club. It was a very important bit of community outreach that the team launched. They also helped support a boosters club. And that boosters club is the forerunner of what we have today as supporters groups. But the Atlanta Soccer Boosters named a high school all-star team. They were the ones that did the first all-state team and named Scotty Robinson of North Springs High School as the first Georgia high school most valuable player. Pretty cool to see all these things happening so fast and so quick going into the Chiefs' second season. They played a couple of preseason games with the Washington Whips in Orlando, where the Whips were training. They beat Washington twice in preseason. But as things got down to the wire getting ready the week of the first match at home, you had a couple of issues. You had some injuries. Willie Evans was injured. Wasn't sure how long it was going to be for him to get back on the field. Goalkeeper Sven Lindberg was going to miss the first two games because he had a textile business in Sweden, and he couldn't leave until after the end of March. So there you go. The season started 2 weeks earlier in 1968 than it did in 67. I guess something got lost in the memo, and Sven Lindberg was not available for the first part of the season. You had some players that had some visa issues getting guys in. It was a little difficult. But the big announcement a couple days before that first game on March 30th was the Chiefs were booked to host an international match, the first international match in Atlanta on May 26th, and it was against Manchester City. And it was a day that I'm sure we'll talk about as Soccer Files continues, but a very important day in Atlanta soccer history, and a day that honestly put Atlanta on the soccer map when the Chiefs beat the defending First Division champions from England, Manchester City. Manchester City was so irate about losing that match that they wanted to play again, and they rescheduled their tour in North America to have another crack at the Chiefs, and they lost the second time as well. So it was an interesting situation all the way around with Manchester City and the Atlanta Chiefs. But those were two huge crowds that were only topped later when Pelé played at Atlanta Stadium. It was March 28th that first game with Manchester City was announced. Another announcement that happened on March 28th was WGST Radio was booked to broadcast the NASL opener on the 30th against Detroit. And Art Collier, who was very well known in the sports media world in Atlanta at the time, was handling play-by-play on that first game. I believe that was the first soccer match broadcast on Atlanta radio. I could not find anything from the 1967 season to definitively say that the Chiefs had radio. Could be wrong. That's another one of those little nuggets that I like to try to find, and I want to try to confirm. But Art Collier did play-by-play for the opener on March 30th, and it was the Detroit Cougars who came to town in front of 11,086. The Chiefs got the 2-1 win over Detroit. Peter McParland and Graham Newton were your goal scorers in that first match. Woosnam went on the record after the match and was happy with the way that his team played. He said, "Statistics will prove we deserve to win. I'm delighted with the play of all the players." That was the start of what turned into a championship for the Atlanta Chiefs in 1968. It's one of the special years in Atlanta soccer history. It's one that I'm sure we'll get into quite a bit here on Soccer Files. And we're open to suggestions on Soccer Files. If you guys have specific things from Atlanta soccer history you'd like for us to dig into here on the SDH Network, shoot us a message on Twitter at Soccer Down Here. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook, both at Soccer Down Here as well. I'm at Longshoe on Twitter. You can send me a message there. You can also shoot us an email, soccerdownhere@gmail.com. Plenty more to dig into about this Atlanta Chiefs season, about the old North American Soccer League, the NASL, the NPSL, the USA, the NAPSL. I mean, all kinds of acronyms. Atlanta Soccer's had them. So we'll talk about all that as we go. But March 30th is a special day in Atlanta soccer history. It was the beginning. It was the first win of a year that turned into a championship for the Atlanta Chiefs, the first soccer championship in Atlanta. That all started on this date in 1968.